In at number 5 we have Medusa. Medusa was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters along with Stetno and Euryale. They were the children of the ancient deities Photsis and his sister Ceto. Their parents were chthonic monsters from an archaic world. Her appearance is that of a winged human female. In the place of hair she had living venomous snakes. The legend goes that if you were to look directly into Medusa's eyes you would be instantly turned to stone. This made Medusa terrifying and fatal to many who tried to attack or even look upon her. She was an extremely beautiful woman as a way to incite people to look upon her beauty and be cursed by her eyes. This curse is not something that she chose, it's actually said that she was the unfortunate victim being cursed with this power. Medusa was cursed when she had an unwilling relationship with Poseidon. Even though she didn't want any relationship with him, the fact that it happened was enough for Athena to be enraged and curse her. She didn't want her to have any lovers for as long as she lived, so anyone who would gaze on her beauty would themselves be cursed. Due to her curse she was feared and many tried to kill her due to it. She was often approached with the intention to take her out, but they would fall from the curse before they had the chance. This was until she was beheaded by Perseus. He was hailed a hero and brought the head to King Polydectes. He was given help from the gods to take her life. Even beheaded she held great power and her head was used against their enemies in wars following this. Medusa's life was full of suffering, none of which was intentional on her part, but she suffered the most due to this. Even though it was not her doing, it's a good thing she is not real. If you could turn to stone just by accidentally looking at her, I think there would be a lot of people turned to stone by her today. Coming in at number 4 we have Whiro. Whiro is the lord of darkness and evil in Maori. Whiro is the lord of darkness and evil in Maori mythology. It is said that he lives in the underworld. According to some tribes, Whiro brings bodies down to the underworld when they pass on, when he then consumes them. Eating these vessels gives him a greater strength. It is said that this will eventually give him enough power to break free of the underworld. If this was to ever happen, he would devour everyone and everything on Earth. Some cultures believe that you must be cremated when you pass on to prevent this from happening. Whiro cannot gain strength from the ashes. Many people have lived in fear on Whiro and would do anything to prevent him from breaking through to the mortal realm. It is said that Whiro lives in a deep cave where he performs dark magic. He creates illness and disease to try and get as many vessels to consume as he can. He finds ways to release these illnesses onto the surface. He is one of the most active and feared gods of the underworld, and all associated with him are also feared. His biggest enemy is his brother Taine. Taine is the god of beauty and peace, and he looks over the forests and birds. He is a stark contrast to his brother. When his family grew frustrated of their confinement, they decided to separate. Whiro wanted to stay in darkness, but Taine wanted the light. From this moment they became enemies, with Whiro hating everything that Taine loved and protected. Hopefully Whiro does not exist. He could be in the underworld gaining strength as we speak, waiting for this moment. Coming in at number 3 we have Apophis. Apophis was the ancient Egyptian deity of chaos, the opponent to the sun god Re. His appearance is that of a giant serpent. He stretched 16 yards in length and his head was made of flint. Each night as the sun set, it is said that Apophis would wait for Re on the horizon and they would have a battle. Although Apophis would fall, he would never be permanently subdued and would return each night to try and stop Re's nightfall ritual. Apophis was never worshipped by the Egyptians like Re, but instead worshipped against. In an annual ceremony named Banishing of Apophis, a priest would build a box thought to contain all the evil of Apophis and then burn it. The people would then be saved from his influence for another year. The Egyptians even wrote a detailed book on how to defeat the evil gods, named the Books of Overthrowing Apep being another name given to the creature. The book went into detail on how to dismember and dispose of the Great Snake. The book even contained instructions on how to create a wax model of Apophis that you could destroy during the nightly battle as a way to aid Re. It is believed that you needed to protect yourself from Apophis once you had passed on. Since he lived in the underworld, your soul needed protection past the living realm. In the Book of the Dead there are multiple spells on how to destroy Apophis once you were dead. They covered every base so that you were prepared to face the serpent no matter what. Coming in at number 2 we have Hel. Hel is the daughter to Loki and resides over a realm of the underworld of the same name. She was given this responsibility of ruling by Odin. She is a half blue and half flesh colored being. It is said she gets a portion of souls in the underworld to rule over and torture as she sees fit. Hel is described as being rather greedy, harsh and cruel. She shows indifference when it comes to the suffering of both the living and the dead. She has many powers at her disposal for being cruel in the underworld. These include age acceleration, disease manipulation, necromancy, and even the kiss of death. These powers were not just confined to her realm, and if she were to come to the mortal world she could use them to create chaos here. It is said she can also sometimes shapeshift like her father, something that can be very dangerous. She has been known to walk in disguise to get unfortunate victims bewitched by her beauty, just to use the kiss of death to bring them to the corner of hell for further torture. There have been depictions of hell in today's media. The character of Hela from Thor Ragnarok is based on Hel's Greek mythology, and as you saw from that depiction, she was cruel and powerful, proving almost unstoppable. Also, she was gorgeous, because Cate Blanchett. I love Hela. She's the hero of Thor Ragnarok. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Lilith. Lilith is a she-demon, once mythological god. Lilith was Adam's first wife. She was made from the same clay as him. Once on Earth, she didn't understand why she had to be subservient to him when they were created as equals. Facts, Lilith. Facts. She made the choice to leave the Garden of Eden. Once she left, Eve was created to take her place and to serve Adam. Lilith left the garden she walked for a long time, maybe even years, until she was found by the archangel Samael, who we now know went on to become Satan. They quickly fell in love and created a place for themselves to live. He had a large influence on Lilith and is the reason she turned to being a demon. She quickly became more and more powerful. Samael left Lilith due to his own greed. She began to grow distaste for men. She gave birth to Samael's children and was then called the mother of all demons. She was also named the Queen of Hell. Her children, named Lilith, were winged sprites who had a tendency to be cruel and violent in nature. It was said they would attack men for their greed. She'd use them as a vessel to get her revenge on what had happened to her. She wanted to punish male greed and their need for power over women like her. Some say she wanted to take down Satan and take his place for herself, but other texts have them ruling together in harmony, and even some say they were married. Lilith is immortal along with her many other powers, meaning if she were real, she could be among us today. She can take any form she likes with her shapeshifting. She is also able to cast spells along with her own telekinesis. In modern media, she is also shown as using voodoo to control people to do her bidding as she wished. She is cunning and likes to use others to get what she wants. That way she does not put herself in danger in any way. If she was alive today, she would be right behind the feminism movement. She'd be leading the charge, and I'd be behind her. Lilith. What queen? Just the one woman who spoke out and was like, equality. And the men are like, no, sit the down.
Number 5. The Other Mother from Neil Gaiman's Coraline. I might turn some heads for bringing this one up, but I will defend my choice with great fortitude. You might argue that the Other Mother is not a god, but I say she created her own world from scratch and ensured that every element was to Coraline's liking. What is a god if it is not creating or destroying worlds? Sure, she can only copy and warp what already exists in the real world, but she does quite a lot with that power alone. You might also say that the Other Mother couldn't stand toe-to-toe with other gods on this and other lists, but nowhere in the title does it say most powerful gods in literature. We're not looking at exclusively combat prowess or destructive power, although those are definitely factors. I'm going for the spook factor on this one. Sewing buttons into your eyes and abandoning the world you've known your whole life in favor of a mirror world? That's a scary proposition. Plus, when a person who looks just like your mother turns into a giant needle-equipped spider who wants to trap you forever, you're gonna get scared. A lot of the other scary gods just don't have that personal touch when ruining everything you've ever loved. It's the thought that counts. Number 4. Desire from Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. A strong feeling of wanting to have something or wishing for something to happen. Desire is the anthropomorphic personification of its name. It is quite possibly the most destructive human emotion because it can be so easily warped and manipulated. Desire can lead people to commit heinous acts at the drop of a hat, and often it is never fulfilled in a way that is satisfying. There are so many things that can go wrong once one begins to desire or covet. Where I touch, things want and need and love, drawn to their objects of desire like butterflies to a candle flame. Despair can take the form of a gorgeous, gender-mutable figure who can change form to fit in whatever situation it finds itself in. It's always the pretty ones that cause trouble. Desire is described as being of medium height and smelling a bit like peaches. Its smiles are brief and sharp, its skin is pale as smoke, and its eyes are tawny and sharp as yellow wine. It has 2 shadows, one black and sharp, the other translucent and wavering. Within the Sandman mythos, Desire is the most casually cruel of the endless. Forever meddling in the affairs of its siblings, it constantly acts without considering the consequences of its actions. Much meddling results in dire consequences, and at many points these consequences could have almost world-shattering results. This flippant behavior from one graced with the powers of the endless is hugely horrifying because it can cause so much to go wrong with seemingly no meaning. Again, it's the human touch that makes this so scary. We discussed another one of the endless, despair, in our last video and found out plenty about what makes a being like that so terrifying. However, it's hard to imagine despair even existing without first the existence of desire. It's an interesting proposition. Can one feel despair without ever knowing what they desire? Number 3, Odium, from Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive. I am emotion incarnate. I am the soul of the spren and of men. I am lust, joy, hatred, anger, and exaltation. I am glory and I am vice. I am the very thing that makes men men. You picking up on a theme yet? Human traits are scary in an omnipotent being. We can't be trusted with that kind of power, why should they? One of the 16 shards, or pieces of the power of creation, Odium is a godlike being who has already killed others on his level. Following the Shattering, an event where the creator god was killed by 16 people, Odium was one of the shards that came to be. After ascending, he methodically sought out and killed 4 other shards: devotion, domination, ambition, and honor. A god that kills other gods is nothing to mess with. Some say that Odium is the wrath of a god, destroying all that dare to defy it. This is a pretty scary notion, as anyone who does anything outside of what Odium deems acceptable may be destroyed without a second thought. However, how Odium describes himself could be even more terrifying. He sees himself as passion, a shard of emotions, especially excessive emotions. Excessive emotions left unchecked can lead to highly destructive results. Whole worlds obliterated in the name of passion. Countless lives ended because of a disagreement between 2 individuals. Although there is a third and possibly more accurate description of Odium: hatred. This seems to line up well with his actions and allows us to come closer to understanding his intent. With powerful magic like void light and void binding at his disposal, and an army of fuse at his beck and call, we do not want Odium giving in to passion or hatred. A whole lot could be at stake. Number 2, Diablo, the prime evil from Diablo. He is the root of all fears, buried deep within mortal minds. He is the nightmare that awakens us, sweating in the dark. He is an entity of pure malevolence and depthless evil. Diablo is so powerful, so capable of instilling terror, he is incapable of feeling fear. Now that is scary. Not that you could convince him that. I know that Diablo does not have roots in literature, but there are plenty of Diablo tomes floating around our earthbound world. In 2002's Diablo, Kingdom of Shadow, the prime evil attempts to open a passage between Hell and Sanctuary. If Sanctuary isn't safe from Hellfire, where is? He, as the most creative and far-sighted of the 3 prime evils, has a great capacity for cruelty on all planes he inhabits. Much like the Lovecraftian son of Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Diablo sees himself as an artist of terror. He does not seek satisfaction in the form of conquest, but instead from the terror he instills in all of his victims. It could even be said that he's the embodiment of terror itself. Possessing powerful magical and physical capabilities once awoken, Diablo is an extremely dangerous being. Even if defeated or sealed away, there's always another way for the prime evil to make its way back into the waking world. Like a good horror movie villain, you can't keep Diablo down for long. Number 1, we've got the God Hand and the idea of evil from Berserk. Berserk is a manga that does not pull any punches. Extreme violence and sexual themes run throughout this long-running series as it struggles with ideas ranging from isolation to camaraderie to the fundamental nature of human beings. Good and evil come up a lot, and no beings embody evil better than the God Hand. I'll group them all into one entity serving the idea of evil because that makes things a little more neat and tidy for the purpose of this list. Got a problem with it? Make your own list. The God Hand consists of 5 members, representing all sorts of forces beyond our control. Fate, temptation, deception, famine, pestilence, gravity, and space. They rule over the human realm in servitude to the idea of evil, and have had a hand in shaping many major events on Earth. They also look like Cenobites from the Hellraiser films, which definitely makes them a great degree scarier. As the most powerful demons, they reign over apostles and grant Beharit users reincarnation in exchange for a sacrifice. And that's part of what makes the God Hand so scary. the sacrifice. A major character in Berserk, Griffith, is gravely wounded at one point and unknowingly activates his Beherit during an eclipse. This brings him into the realm of the God Hand along with all of his comrades. Once there, the God Hand begin the reincarnation process with Griffith so that he may become reborn as one of them. However, this means that the people that mean the most to Griffith must be sacrificed. All of the members of the Band of Hawks are murdered, and only 2 other major characters, Guts and Casca, survive. The fact that 5 demons hold such power over all of humanity and are constantly looking for ways to add to their ranks is legitimately terrifying. What's even more scary though is that they're only the functional extension of an even higher power. The idea of evil. The idea of evil has been hypothesized as humanity's collective consciousness, finding a scapegoat for all the horror and atrocity in the world. If I hadn't already convinced you that humanity was actually the scariest thing of all, maybe the fact that humanity dreamed up a scapegoat so powerful that it gained sentience and started to change the course of world events will adjust your perspective. This concept, the idea of evil, was so powerful that even the creator of Berserk, Kentaro Miura, actually retconned it after originally writing it in. Miura stated that it limited his creative freedom and he wanted to ensure that God was left ambiguous. The idea of evil was too powerful for even the author to let slide, so we're just left with the God Hand. But that's still some pretty scary stuff.
Kicking off at number 5, Tash, Chronicles of Narnia. And no, not Natasha, but Tash. Tash the inexorable, Tash the irresistible, the patron god of the ruling class of Calaman, essentially the best friend and overseer of the rich, who gobbles up poor people and the working class just for the sheer fun of it, to further fuel his dark and manipulative reign. Now, if you know anything about C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, then you'll certainly know that this particular fantasy series draws its main body of inspiration from the Judeo-Christian religion. And whereas the bold and brave lion himself, Aslan, represents Jesus, while as you may imagine, Tash represents the pure and evil antithesis of that, the Antichrist. And yes, say what you will about the Chronicles of Narnia, and whether you think it's tame or not comparable to some later fiction found here, the truth of the matter is Tash is pretty damn terrifying, and he's the purveyor of some pretty horrendous themes throughout the series of what is essentially a children's novel. Tash appears as a dark and shadowy demon, an almost skeletal figure of a humanoid body with a vulture-like head and 4 grotesque taloned arms. His presence is said to bring with it the cold, and his stench is that of death. And yet, whilst many people in the world of Narnia refuse to believe in Tash, he is very much a real and evil entity. Now, strangely enough, although being the pure antithesis of Aslan, one of Narnia's most prolific figures, Tash appears only twice in this series, and in 1954's The Horse and His Boy, and in 1956's The Last Battle. In the former, he's referred to in the same passage as 2 other gods, Azeroth, where have we heard that name before, and Zardina, the Lady of the Night and the Maidens. And yet still, comparable to those 2, Tash is still the only figure that the fanatical people of Calaman would like to sacrifice children to in his name. Yeah, that's pretty much the extent of it really. At one point, the followers of Tash tried to run a smear campaign against Aslan by suggesting that Tash and Aslan were the same entity, conveniently called Tashlan. Yeah, obviously they didn't buy the fact, given the fact that Tash is very clearly a giant, terrifying, bird-headed primeval straight from some Assyrian cultist mythology. Hey, it was a simpler time. Swinging in at number 4, Despair, the Sandman. And you know what? We could have certainly featured the actual main character of Neil Gaiman's The Sandman on this list, the dream-sleeping, swagger-walking, chain-smoking, coffee fiend himself, Dream, aka Morpheus if you're feeling adventurous. Because as a side note, for a protagonist, Dream does some pretty messed up stuff in that brilliant graphic novel series, and kind of ends his reign by just killing everyone. Sort of. He certainly commits a few murders along the way, but whatever. For the sake of brevity, we'll give Dream the benefit of the doubt, and instead we'll cast our gaze toward his equally perplexing and utterly bone-chilling counterpart, Despair. One of them, anyway. As is written in Endless Nights, the follow-up to the Sandman series, and one that fully fleshes out the pantheon of the endless, take away the despair and there is nothing left. Nothing but an empty room and a hook of the perfect shape and size for snagging at your heart. Despair most often appears as a short, naked, grey and rotund woman with sharp, pointed teeth and greasy black hair tied in a bun. She demonstrates no odour, but allegedly her shadow has often been described as smelling musky and pungent like the skin of a snake. Her sigil is a hooked ring which she only wears on her left hand and haphazardly uses it to tear into her own flesh absentmindedly, which, yeah, that's one of the reasons she's making this list really. You see, in Despair's realm, in stark comparison to the wild and whimsical realm of the dreaming that Morpheus rules over, is instead a grey and foggy space filled with endless, skittering rats and mirrors used for looking upon people in the depths of their own despair. You see, what is strange is that Despair is said to be one of the few endless that have seen 2 2 incarnations. It isn't clear as to how she was initially destroyed and reformed, but this one is certainly a bleak and bewildering replacement. Compared to all of the other Endless who are clear in their emotional personifications, despair is a tough one to handle. Next up at number 3, Morgoth, the Lord of the Rings. Of course, we can't really talk about terrifying godlike entities in fantasy and horror fiction without first addressing perhaps the OG of Dark Lords of Fantasy incarnate, Morgoth Bauglir, or Melkor, depending on which point in his life you familiarise yourself with him, because as we all know, even Dark Lords of Chaos and Shadow have a story, and we should respect that, even if it is full of betrayal and terror and evil of all sorts of machinations. Now, if you know anything about the vast and flowing mythology penned by Tolkien in both The Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion, as well as many other works of fiction, then you'll know that Eru Ilúvatar, the creator of all things Ea and Arda included, also created the entities of the Aina to live within it. In the void of nothingness, he gave life to these angelic beings, and Melkor was the most powerful of them all. However, dissatisfied that Eru had abandoned the void, Melkor grew curious enough to seek to emulate his own creator in an attempt to fill the void with sentient beings. For this though, Melkor would need the secret fire, and that was impossible for him to find. To combat that, Melkor sought to create his own discordant melodies in the music of the Aina, the fabric of creation that forms the basis for the themes of all things, and because of that, Melkor introduced the first music of chaos, the same disharmonies that were responsible for all later evil in Arda. Well, obviously, eventually the will to exceed his creator's power turned Melkor into a vile and twisted image of himself, and as the sentient races of Arda began to emerge, his desire to conquer and overthrow contorted him into Morgoth, the entity responsible for the orcs, Ungoliant, and all the spiders, werewolves, balrogs, revenants, and the darkness in the hearts of men. This guy burned down world trees like it was going out of fashion. You see, it's hard to gauge just exactly where the veracity of Morgoth lies, because in the truest sense of the word, you cannot get more evil than Morgoth. And then, of course, there's the emergence of the cult of Melkor, headed by the lieutenant of evil himself, the Dark Lord Sauron, where here, as the high priest of that cult, Sauron orchestrated the human sacrifice of the Númenors in Melkor's name, and then pride cometh before the fall and all that. Morgoth, guys, he's got a mace called Grond that was literally forged from the essence of the underworld. I would not like to meet him in a tavern. Put it that way. Coming in at number 2, Randal Thor, the Wheel of Time. Alright, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently with this particular point, because by rights, in terms of power level, this guy should probably take the number 1 spot on pretty much every literature list ever written. However, what sets this entry apart, as those of you who have read the Wheel of Time series will know, is that Randal Thor is kind of the good guy. I mean, he is the good guy. He's the personification of light and righteous flames, but he can also kind of destroy the fabric of all reality without breaking a sweat. The reason Randal Thor is ranking so high here on the terrifying meter is that if this guy was on the wrong side, we'd be donezo. I mean, it's a good thing that he wasn't or isn't. Rand is very clearly the main protagonist of Robert Jordan's phenomenal fantasy series, but guys, really, the Dragon Reborn would cover the entire earth in a blanket of cleansing fire in a single moment if he ever wished to do so. And that makes him terrifying. He's Superman meets Dr. Manhattan on a biblical scale. As written in Keeper of the Chronicles, he is born again. I feel him. The dragon takes his first breath on the slopes of Dragon Mount. He is coming. Light help us. Light help the world. He lies in the snow and cries like the thunder. He burns like the sun. I mean, I know he's good and he's going to save the day and everything, but that's terrifying, guys. Born in the year 978 of the New Earth, Rand is the most central of the 3 protagonists that make up the series, and really, guys, if you haven't, then Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series needs your attention. It's awesome, and it's with themes like this that gives it reason alone to stand out as such a remarkable work of literature. I'll try and avoid as many spoilers as possible, and this entry is kind of a spoiler alone, but if the thought of the root of all goodness and light in the world is also a source of unbridled terror and overwhelming fear, then yeah, this series is certainly for you. I'm just really glad that Rand is one of the good guys. Thanks. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the crippled god, Malazan. And as so far as overwhelmingly powerful entities being the source of all of this terror, then we don't have to preface it with the willy or won't he ways of Randal Thor, because instead we can pin it all on one of the most potentially destructive forces ever found in fiction, the crippled god, the chained one, the death slayer, and the king of chains. Really, we'll try and do this one without spoilers, because Malazan Book of the Fallen is an absolutely astounding fantasy series, and if you haven't yet had a chance to check it out, then please check it out. And also, the audiobooks are really well done, so there's another reason too if you've got a long commute. Although there are a lot of characters to keep track of, so if that's not your kind of thing, actually no, just read it regardless. Anyway, the Malazan series encompasses many differing woven series featuring gods, immortals, alien entities, pretty much everything going. All of them though pale in comparison to the crippled god, and yet thankfully for everyone, this guy is chained and imprisoned, so he can't hurt anyone at all. I'm sure those chains will hold, right? You see, throughout the series, the crippled god often appears as a frail, bent figure, wrapped and hooded in rags and blankets, often inhabiting a dilapidated, sun-bleached tent found along a sandy beach upon an endless shore. Usually he is found huddled over a smoking brazier, speaking in a raspy voice intermingled by hacking coughs and laboured breathing. He has long tangled hair and all of his fingers and his thin mangled hands are broken and shattered. He weeps and moans in his constant agony, and he constantly throws seas into the brazier before him to further the wafting smoke that he emerges from. Really guys, I know it's quite a bit of a cop-out, but we can't get into the bulk of the crippled god without any spoilers. But if that initial appearance is curiosity enough to pique your interest, then believe me, as far as the crippled god is concerned, there is far more to be discovered, at your own risk, of course. The crippled god knows only suffering, and his only desire is to make all others feel the same.